Voivod got their start in the early 1980s, and after 5 albums, they had managed to get themselves a deal with a major label, put out an album that sold about 300,000 copies, had a minor hit single, and things were looking really good for the band. However, as the 1990s started, there was a change happening in the music scene. The band were aware of it. What were they going to do? What was their next move? We'll take a look at that now in part 2 of my look at the history of the band Voivod. Here we go. The band began preparing for their new album. So Snake began working together with Away, coming up with themes for the songs and the song lyrics. They decided to give the Voivod character a rest and instead came up with a bunch of songs that told kind of strange legends in a Voivod type of way. Blackie and Piggy were working together on the music. In fact, it is said that Blackie contributed more music to this album than any of the other ones he had so far. With the perceived changes in the music scene and with the experience touring with Rush, the band decided that they would like to ask Rush, former Rush producer Terry Brown, who had produced all of the classic Rush albums, to come in and produce their new album, which was entitled Angel Rat. However, this is where things started to go astray. While the band had their heads down to make the new album, Blackie was not particularly thrilled about the way the sound was going. He didn't feel that this direction was the right direction for Voivod to go in. Also, while he says Terry Brown was a complete gentleman, he was also changing the sound of the band in the way that he did not like. Also, at the time, Blackie was getting into composing his own music using synthesizers and so on, and according to Away, he was creating music that was kind of like weird ballet dance music. Very good, of course, but certainly not really suitable for the style of music that Voivod was playing. And perhaps he was not so much focused on the band. However, Blackie insists that it wasn't just that, it was just he did not like the way things were going. He tried to hold a couple of band meetings. He also knew that Mechanic Records was into financial trouble, and he tried to warn the band about this. However, after the band meetings, nothing really came out of it. When he tried to enter the control booth and direct how the music was going, Terry Brown basically asked him not to interfere. And so, after recording all his bass parts, but before the album was released, Blackie decided that he was going to leave the band. This was a big change. You know, a few years earlier in an interview, the band had said, Voivod is us four. If one of us should ever quit the band, it is not going to be Voivod anymore. So, Blackie left. What was the band going to do? Well, Piggy and Away both felt that they had put a lot of effort into the album, and it would be a shame to just suddenly break up the band now without doing anything to promote it. Things were also admittedly a little bit more uncomfortable. There was a lot of pressure going on from the record label and other outside forces asking the band to produce a single. Of course, with Astronomy Domine being a minor hit, there was kind of pressure for the band to produce another hit song. In the end, somewhere in an interview, Piggy said that honestly he was not happy with the way Angel Rat turned out. But at the time they were recording it, he felt it was the thing to do. This album here has a lot of fans divided. For most people at the time, it was a shock. Voivod was a thrash metal band, a technical thrash band, a progressive metal band, whatever. And they came out with Angel Rat, which is very much an alternative rock or college radio type album. The songs are not as complex. There's more catchy hooks. Snake is actually even singing on songs rather than his more traditional punk rock bellow, which we heard previously. There are more melodic guitar solos in here. It is really a different album. And it is an album which at the time really confused a lot of people. If it was meant to get the reach the mainstream market, it failed to do so because it is just a little too strange and different. It is Voivod. Whatever they do, it's going to be something that is not typical of the mainstream. So it didn't catch on in the mainstream as well. Fans of the band didn't really get what this was about. The album sold half as many copies as Nothing Face, and they had not really any big tour to promote it. Of course, they lost their bass player. They had to just, get in some session folks to come in and play for them while they even played any of the shows for this. But the album actually has been given, in hindsight, it's been given much more praise. Snake, I think, ranked this around number 7, and he said this album deserves a lot more than what it is given. As well, Enslaved's Grutel Kjelsen appeared in a YouTube video last year talking about Vinyl to Die For and how he had tracked down an album of vinyl version of this album and paid a rather large amount of money for it, much more than he would normally pay to buy an album copy, a vinyl copy. So yes, this album actually does have a lot of love going its way. And honestly, when I first heard it too, I didn't really dig it either. However, I went back and listened to it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, if in 1991 I had not known of Voivod, and at this point I was getting really interested in Canadian bands, if I had heard this at the time, I would have thought, who are these guys? They're brilliant. I want to hear more of their stuff. An interesting thing to add on to this was that the Mechanic Records head Steve Sinclair thought that the album should be remixed to make it a little bit more radio accessible, and the band, according to one source, the band gave them a couple of songs which they remixed, and the record label remixed and added in keyboards and female vocals. But in another interview, the band said they were really disgusted by those 2 songs, and they asked them not to release them to the radio, but at that point the songs had already been released. There are various interviews talking about this where some say that they were disappointed by the album mix overall. However, in another interview they say the mix on the album is the mix they did with Terry Brown, and that is the mix that they wanted. With Angel Rat wrapped up, not really much of a tour, Blackie away from the band, and their label not really in good financial shape, made you wonder, what was Voivod going to do now? In 1992, Noise Records released a compilation of Voivod songs from the first 6 albums, called The Best of Voivod. The band then looked forward to producing their next album. They were still with MCA, and MCA was giving them a little bit more money to go ahead with the next album. This was still a time, I guess, it sounds like, when record companies usually expected the band to have a few albums before they really hit their peak. Now, of course, Voivod had already hit their creative peak with Nothing Face, but MCA were really hoping the band would continue. So they put a little bit more money in than Angel Rat for the next album. Now then, the remaining band members of Piggy Away and Snake decided that they would not get a new bass player in. Instead, they would just find a bass player that they could work with for the next album. And they found a fellow named Pierre Saint-Jean. Piggy also wanted the band to stretch out with their songs a little bit more. Angel Rat had been an album of mostly pretty short, concise songs that didn't venture too far into strange territories as they had been doing previously. So he thought it was time for the band to start doing a little bit longer tracks again that had different changes happening in the music. And as if to emphasize this point, they produced their longest song ever, the 17-minute plus Jack Luminous, which for a lot of people is a highlight in Voivod's career. They also covered another Pink Floyd song, this time the Nile song, which is actually one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs. And to be honest, this time here, I actually prefer the Pink Floyd original. I think just because the original is just so raw and hard for 1969, it just has that much more impact. However, Voivod did do a very good job of covering it in Voivod style, similar as they had done with Astronomie Domine. The music, the songs were still a little bit more towards the melodic side. You can still hear some of the influences, some of the styles on Angel Rat as you can on the new album, but it did also bring back in the more metal guitar sound in places as opposed to an alternative rock type sound. The Outer Limits was released on Mechanic MCA Records August 3rd, 1993. This album cover here actually has a 3D effect, and the album comes with a pair of 3D glasses so that you can get the full effect here. Unfortunately, this heavy metal scene at the time was really starting to change in North America. The whole grunge scene had taken over. The metal sound was starting to be looked down upon a bit. Of course, the underground scene was thriving, but that was largely in death metal or, 1993, they still hadn't really started going with the Norwegian black metal thing yet. In spite of producing an album which many fans look back on now as one of their favorites, the album didn't do as well for the band as they had hoped. Snake in particular was really disappointed with the heavy metal scene there in 1993. To complicate things further, the bass player they had brought in for the tour of the United States ended up having visa problems and couldn't get a work visa to work in the United States. Snake was also dealing with some addictions, a lot of personal problems, and just general disappointment and frustration with the whole thing. And so after the Outer Limits tour, he then announced to the band that he needed some time away. And as he puts it, he could have asked them to give him some time, like a year or so, but the band needed to move on. The band needed to cut the next album and needed to make money. They couldn't just sit back and wait. So, thinking about the band, he decided that he would quit and they could continue on without him. By early 1994, Voivod was now down to only 2 of its 4 founding members. Now, the original distinctive Voivod sound had been established by each of these 4 individuals, whether it was Snake's punkish style of singing, if it was Piggy's unique guitar chords and guitar playing, if it was the sound of Blackie's bass, or if it was Away's drumming. We were down to the drumming and the guitars by now. What was Voivod going to do? Well, I guess they just decided they had to press on. Eric Forrest was born on February 13th, 1970, exactly the release date of Black Sabbath's debut album. He was really interested in heavy metal in the 1980s, and he took up playing the bass guitar at the age of 14. He began singing a little bit later on, and he says that his early style of singing was more closer to Bruce Dickinson or Rob Halford. He tried to go for that more powerful, smooth-sounding operatic approach, I guess. However, it was just a few months before joining Voivod, being asked to join Voivod, that he actually really felt inspired by Sepultura and one of their recent albums and decided he would try to learn this more aggressive style of singing for extreme metal. Eric was playing in a band called Thunder Circus around Toronto, and a friend of his who was in another band, that band was managed by one of Voivod's former managers, a fellow by the name of Pierre Perdu, and he suggested to Eric, why don't you send him something? You never know what might come up. So Eric sent some demos off to him, and after a little while, he got word back that there was an opening in Voivod. Maybe Eric might want to try out for it. And so he thought, well, yeah, let me go for it. So he went in and he did his audition with the band. They jammed together for about 15 minutes. And Piggy in a way said, yep, you're the guy. You're in. And they all went out to the bar for drinks after that. So that was the beginning of the next phase of Voivod. We were down to a power trio right now with Eric Forrest doing bass and vocals, and he got his nickname E-Force. Sounds pretty good. Eric Forrest, E-Force. Nice. And then, of course, Piggy on guitars and Away on drums. They went ahead and cut their first album, Negatron, which was released on November 21st, 1995. Negatron was a big change in the band's sound. First of all, they went straight back into the heavy stuff, but this was different. This was not thrash metal heavy. This was not even the technical progressive metal style that they had forged ahead with. This here, often I've heard it said that it has more of a kind of Fear Factory groove to it. There is a bit of a groove metal feel in places as well. There is an almost industrial metal sound to it in places. But basically this is a very loud and assertive and aggressive album. This was released on Hypnotic Records, and when asked about his contribution to the band's sound, because the band's sound really did change here after Eric joined, Eric E. Force went ahead to say, well, I'm not the one who steers the ship. I give whatever I can, whatever they ask me to do, I give my best. And that's all. So Eric basically says that it was Piggy and Away who were steering the ship. And they were the ones who wanted to give Voivod this new sound. As well, they also had a special guest here, a Jim Thirlwell of the band Phobos. He helped out with the track DNA, Don't Know Anything. That's what it's called. Don't know anything. Don't know N-O anything. This song definitely has a very different feel to it from the rest of the songs, and it is really very much an industrial type thing. Apparently, Jim also knows about, was partly involved with Trent Reznor and Marilyn Manson. And I think you can kind of hear that influence a bit on that song. Apparently also that one time when Voivod were playing at CBGB's in New York, Jim was there. And so they just invited him up to perform with them on the stage. And Eric was like, so what do I do? And Piggy said, just play in E. That was one of the stories there that Eric told about. So they went ahead and spent a lot of time in 1986 touring in Europe for this album. As well, Piggy and Away found time to visit Jason Newsted at his studio in California, Chop House Studios, and they actually recorded a bunch of songs together. However, the recordings could not be released because both Jason Newsted and the Voivod guys were under contract, so they couldn't actually release the material. However, one of the songs, called Embody, actually carried over to the next Voivod album. From what I've heard, the album Phobos was recorded on analog equipment. It is following the same style of Negatron, except this here actually seems to be even darker and heavier. I've actually heard some people say that this is probably the darkest album in the Voivod catalog. Now, what is interesting about Phobos is that the Voivod character is revived for this album, and this is again a concept album each song telling some different story about the Voivod character. And in fact, this is apparently a continuation of the Dimension Hatros story. One thing that's kind of interesting on here is on the track Temp Mort. Gosh, my French pronunciation. Temp Mort. Anyway, basically time death. Away plays the accordion on here, and that is the second time that you can hear Away's accordion playing on a Voivod album. The previous one being from Nothing Face, the opening track, The Unknown Knows. At the very end, there's a bit of accordion coming in. I really like this album here, actually. It has this massive sound to it that makes me feel like there is a cosmic-sized tennis racket just swooping in and blasting you in the backside and knocking you out through the wall in the room. There is one song on here called Neutrino, which nobody has mentioned in all the reviews I've heard or read, but I really love it. It has this sound, like drums, bass, guitar, all just at one time going BOOM! With this echo. BOOM! And the echo. And it makes me feel like there are some people on a spaceship and their engines are not working, and outside is this massive space-type beast which is trying to break through the hull to get to the insides, and it's that BOOM! This echo and everybody just frozen in fear. That's the impression I get listening to that. There are some pretty slow, heavy riffs on here as well, with an almost doom metal type sound. I really love it. And then they did also another cover song here. Is this actually Embody from the Jason Newsted project, which was called Tarat, by the way, and a cover of 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. Both appear on here, but the font is different. This is all Away's writing here, and then there's typed font down here. So these must be two extra tracks that are not part of the actual Phobos concept, which starts with Catalepsy 1 and ends with Catalepsy 2. I've heard some people review ranking the Voivod albums. They placed this one and Negatron somewhere in the middle or slightly below the middle. People often put Phobos ahead of Negatron, but there was one guy, I think he actually placed Phobos to around number 4 in his ranking, and I was really happy for that. 4 or 5. I was happy for it because I put this in my top 7. I like it. Voivod's next release was an album called Chronic. Now this was actually a compilation album. It includes 3 remixes of Forlorn, Nanoman, and Mercury, which were given a kind of almost industrial techno type makeover, and quite honestly I found them really painful to listen to. But then there are 3 other tracks, Vortex, Drift, and Erosion, which are new unreleased tracks with Eric, and then a 4th one, Ion, which was actually used in the 2001 heavy metal movie soundtrack. So as Away says, he never actually got his artwork in Heavy Metal magazine, but he got one of his band's songs on the soundtrack for a heavy metal movie. So that was pretty cool. And then after that we have 4 live tracks, Project X, Cosmic Conspiracy, Astronomy Domine, and Nuclear War, performed with Eric on vocals and bass. So that's pretty cool. The band were then later on in Germany, heading off to, I believe it was the Wacken Festival, when suddenly they blew a tire on the Autobahn and their vehicle flipped. Piggy was injured, but Eric was really badly injured, and he ended up being in a coma in hospital and then taking several months of rehabilitation to learn how to walk again. And he recounts a bizarre story while he was in a coma where he felt he was having an out-of-body experience. He could see Away and Piggy there visiting him in the hospital, and he was trying to call out to them, but of course they couldn't respond. It was a really hard time, hard blow for the band. They really lost their momentum, and you know, Voivod were actually really struggling during the latter half of the 90s, perhaps all the way through the 90s. In one article I read, it was saying about how the band's shows were getting smaller and smaller until in some places they were just playing small clubs even. Eric did learn how to walk again, and the band performed opening for Iron Maiden in 1999. Eric was able to get out on stage and play and sing, although apparently he did need crutches still to move around. Still, it was a big improvement because doctors had expected he might not be able to walk again, and he said that he defied their expectations by being able to get up and do just that within a year. So that is really great. At this point here, a 4th release with Eric for E-Force. What came out, this was the Voivod Lives album, and this was an all-live album with Eric singing material, largely from Negatron, but also a lot of the band's classic songs as well. As they came into the year 2000, they began talking about writing a new album, and it seemed that they were going to do a final chapter in the Voivod story. And in this story here, the Voivod was going to finally confront his creator and actually destroy his creator, and thus achieving ultimate freedom, according to what I read about the idea. They recorded a demo of an album's worth of songs, but things were still going rough with Eric, and early in 2001, Piggy and Away called them together for a band meeting, and they basically decided that Voivod would have to go on He had us for a little while. As Away and E-Force walked from Piggy's place, E-Force, Eric, said to Away, "You know what? Why don't you give Jason Newsted a call?" And Away's response was, yeah, well, Wrapping it up, Eric was not pleased to be out of the band. He feels that by breaking up the band, it was the nice way to let him go. However, he understood it was also a business decision. Voivod's finances were in the red. They had tried to sue in Germany for some kind of recompense for the accident. They lost. And then there was a case there where Eric was supposedly suing Voivod, but Eric says it was not me. It was basically one word: insurance. Things were not looking so well. Anyway, Eric says that he has no hard feelings against the band and they are still good friends. Anyway, he gave the best he could for the band while he was with them, and it was time for the band to move on. He felt very certain that Snake would be coming back into the band again. They actually had performed a show in 1999 with Neurosis, where Snake came on stage and performed a couple of songs with them. So Eric was pretty sure Snake was coming back. However, for the time being, Away went off to work on other music projects, and Piggy apparently went off to be the lighting director at Montreal's oldest theatre. And so, in 2001, Voivod was temporarily given a break. What was going to happen to the band from here on in? Well, let's take a look at that in part 3. Thank you for watching so far. I hope you enjoyed parts 1 and 2, and we'll see you in part 3. Take care.